Hey everyone, and welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about layers in Photoshop. Now, layers to digital design is like the sliced bread of the real world. Without it, we just wouldn't survive. In my opinion, layers is one of the most important elements in Photoshop. Instead of working on a flat canvas like you would in traditional art, layers provides you a multi-dimensional workspace to make your editing a lot easier. In this video, we're going to go ahead and dive into the magical world of layers and all the things that go along with it. On the right side of your workspace, by default, you're going to find your Layers panel. Now, if you don't see it there for whatever reason, under the Window menu at the top, you can always activate that Layers panel if you can't find it. There are a few main things that this panel will allow you to accomplish that will drastically help your workflow. You can visually arrange the different elements of your document, you can group similar layers into folders, you can adjust transparency, add adjustments, mask unwanted areas of your images, add an assortment of effects to your layers called layer styles, and filter your layers, which is new in Photoshop CS6. Now, when you start off with a new document, you're given a single layer, the background. Now, it's important to note that this layer has very limited functionality. It's kind of like starting off with a canvas when you're painting. You're going to notice that there's a lock icon to the right of this layer. This indicates that that layer cannot be moved, either within the document itself or above or below additional layers. And while you're able to use your brushes and make color adjustments to the background layer, you're really working in a 2D environment. It's usually a good idea to unlock the background to give you more flexibility in your editing. This can be done in a few different ways. You can either go to the top to the Layer menu, down to New, and then Layer from Background, or you can double-click on the background layer near the lock icon. Once you perform one of these two actions, the New Layer window will allow you to change your layer's name, give it a visual color code, and change the blend mode and opacity. And once you press OK, you now have a real layer on your document. Now, you may have noticed that the buttons which were previously inactive are now active. We're going to go through some of these buttons in this video and the videos coming up. Let's go ahead and start with creating new layers. So now that you know what a layer is, how do you create more? Well, there are several ways to do so. You can either start at the Layer menu at the top, go down to New, and then Layer. You can also press the Create New Layer button at the bottom of your Layers panel. Or you can create a layer using a shortcut key. On the Mac, it's Command-Shift-N. On Windows, it's Control-Shift-N. And once you have a new layer created, it's going to show up above the previous active layer. Each layer will display a small thumbnail to the left, which is going to show you the contents of that layer. Now, because this new layer is transparent, you can only see a checkered pattern, which is the universal transparent pattern. But if you were to paint something randomly on the layer, you'll see that the thumbnail is updated to reflect the new changes. But it may be a little bit difficult to see if you're working with a high-resolution monitor. The thumbnails may be a little bit small. Here's a little tip. If you open up the Layers panel menu at the top right corner, you can choose panel options at the bottom. This window here allows you to turn off your thumbnails or enlarge them if you need to. It also offers a few other options which we'll touch on in a future video. When you're working with only a few layers, a larger thumbnail may seem ideal, but when you're dealing with a lot of layers, which we're going to take a look at in a second, you may want to keep it at a medium or small size. Now, as you start using Photoshop more and more, your projects are bound to get bigger and bigger. This is going to lead to a really messy layers panel. Let's talk a little bit about layer management. As you can see on this document, the layers panel is an absolute mess. There are a ton of layers with really no indication of what any of them are and what belongs to what layer. There are two things that we're going to be discussing to help with your layer organization: labels and groups. Now, starting off with labeling, if you'd like to be able to name your layers right from the get-go, if you create your layers by pressing the button at the bottom of the Layers panel, make sure to hold down your Alt or Option key, Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac. This will force the new layer window to pop up, just like you would if you used the other methods. Now you're able to name your layer at the time of creation. However, if your layer was already created, naming it is just as easy. A simple double-click over top of the current layer's name will allow you to type in a new one. And if you're running Photoshop CS6, a simple press of the Tab key on your keyboard will hop to the next layer so you can rename it right away. And another new feature in Photoshop CS6 is the addition of the Rename Layer item under the Layer menu at the top. Now at first you might think this is a waste of time. However, because it's a menu item, you can assign a shortcut key by going up to the Edit menu and then down to Keyboard Shortcuts. From here you can locate the Layer menu and then locate the Rename Layer option. And you can assign a shortcut key to it, so if you need to rename a layer, you just press the shortcut key, type in the name, and then press Return or Enter to accept it. This can certainly help speed up your workflow. Now, what about grouping? How can this help with layer management? Well, just like folders on your computer, groups will help you sort layers which belong together. For example, these few layers here are all part of the same element within the document. Instead of having all of these layers mixed together with everything else, you can combine them into a group. Let me show you how. Down at the bottom of the Layers panel, there's a small folder icon. Simply clicking on this icon will allow you to create a new group where, just like with layers, you can simply double-click to rename it. Now from here, if the group is highlighted and open, indicated by a downwards arrow, everything you create will automatically be placed inside of that group. Otherwise, you can simply drag your layers on top of the group to include them, just like you would on your computer. And you can tell that a layer is inside of the group by the extra gap to the left of that layer. And once you've finished working on a group, you can collapse it to keep your layers panel nice and tidy. Now here's a neat little tip. If you've neglected managing your layers and decide later on that you want to start placing your layers inside of groups, you can select a few layers at once by either holding down Command or Control and clicking on the layers that you want selected, or you can select one of the layers, hold down Shift and click on the last one to select everything in between. When you're ready to place those layers inside of a group, hold down the Shift key while clicking on the Create New Group icon. This will take all of those layers that you had selected and add them to the group automatically. This will certainly save you a lot of time. At this point, you might be asking yourself, with all of these groups that hide my layers, how am I ever going to find anything? Well, luckily for you, Photoshop CS6 finally includes layer filtering. You can find the filtering section right at the top of your layers panel. Photoshop allows you to filter your layers in a variety of ways, as you can see under the drop-down menu, which by default is set to Kind. In this section, we're going to be taking a look at the different filtering options that are available to you. The first option, Kind, will allow you to filter by the different layers that are available in Photoshop. Pixel layers, which refers to photos or rasterized shapes, adjustment layers, type layers, shape layers, and smart objects. And to the right of that, we have the on and off switch, which allows you to temporarily turn filtering on or off. Of course, if needed, you're free to choose more than one filtering method. If you wanted to view only adjustment layers and shape layers, you can easily choose to do so. The next filtering option is Name, and as you may have guessed, selecting Name allows you to search for a specific layer in your document. Simply type in a word, and Photoshop will show you all layers that contain that term. Next is Effect. This option filters your layers by a specific layer style. For example, if you wanted to see all layers that contain a bevel and emboss, it's as easy as selecting Bevel and Emboss from the dropdown. Next is Mode, and just like Effects filters by specific layer styles, Mode filters by blending mode, such as Overlay, Hard Light, or Color Dodge. The Attribute option contains many self-explanatory variables for you to choose from. Do you want to see only layers that are visible? How about only layers that are hidden? Locked layers, layers with layer effects, and so on. And finally, you have color filtering. If you're an organization freak and love to color code your layers, you can choose to view only layers of a certain color. If you've never color-coded your layers before, it's as simple as right-clicking on the layer and choosing a color. And that's a look at creating, organizing, and filtering layers in Photoshop. In the next video, we're going to look at a few different kinds of layers and how they can help you edit your projects non-destructively. We'll see you soon.